That is, nobody knew me by Jimmy. Everybody knew me by Charles. Only those closest to me knew me by Jimmy. And man, how great it is. We get tired of hearing about the love of God, but there's nothing stronger, and it never gets old. Amen.
That's 1, 2, 3. That's 1, 2, 3. Okay, hey, I'm on. Well, started out last night just amazed at what Scotty said right before I came up about the man in the truck in town who says to worship the devil and 666 on the back of his truck. And Scotty prayed earnestly for that man. We all should pray for him that he not suffer the consequences that he's heading toward at a rapid rate of speed. But I'm even more blown away tonight by what Charles said. And it may not be anything at all spiritual, but he and I have something very, very much in common that there's probably not two other people in the world that have. I didn't know my name was Charles until I went to the first grade. The teacher called the roll. And I didn't answer. They said, Charles, Charles. I said, I'm not Charles. I'm Jimmy. My brothers and sisters wanted to name me Jimmy. Mom and Dad named me Charles. My brothers and sisters called me Jimmy. It's amazing. Amazing. God bless you. God bless you. Let's pray. Father, give me the message that you have me to give tonight, Lord. Make sure that they're your words, not my words. Lord, open the hearts here to hear the words tonight. Make them words of encouragement. Make them words of love. Make them words that they can live by and they can understand. Father, we just give you the praise and glory for every good thing that happens. And we give you praise for filling this room with your spirit tonight. Yes, Lord. We just thank you for being here. We thank you for bringing each person that's in these seats here tonight, Lord, because we know that you ordained that they be here for whatever reason. We could all be someplace else, but we're here, Lord, for you. We're here, Lord, to commune with you. We're here, Lord, to be in your presence. We just thank you for being here with us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Well, if you weren't here last night, you missed the best message of the weekend. I think. I don't know. But we've got one for you tonight. We'll have one. Tomorrow morning is a real treat. Brenda's going to speak here at the church tomorrow morning. And tomorrow night we'll be back for the conclusion of our weekend-long altar call. Well, it's hard to believe we're right here in the middle of it now. Time passes so quickly nowadays. Anybody remember the movie Old Brother, Where Art Thou? It's hard to believe it's been almost 20 years since that movie was out. I can't remember the last movie I went to see. I've pretty much given up on them. I find it difficult to stay awake that long these days as well. Years ago, I might pick one movie a year to go see. And in the year 2000, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was that movie. I enjoyed it, especially the bluegrass songs that provided the soundtrack. George Clooney was Ulysses Everett McGill. He was a convict who encouraged a couple of fellow prisoners to escape from the Mississippi chain gang. Several times throughout the movie, Everett found himself in a pickle, in a situation where he could see no means of escape. And he nervously would explain to whomever he was with or sometimes just to himself, that he was in a tight spot. Once he and his fellow escapees were surrounded in a barn. They were in a barn, and the sheriff's department was about to capture them, had them surrounded, and they were in there. And the sheriff's department, the sheriff set the barn on fire. And Everett said, "We're in a tight spot." And they were in a tight spot. The flames were coming up all around them, but a boy rode them out of there in a car as they broke through the back of the barn and got out and escaped. Somehow, he would always manage throughout the movie to escape dire circumstances and live to run another day. When we find ourselves in a tight spot, we turn to God for help. We have a powerful God who hears our prayers. He delivers us from the things he doesn't want us to experience. And he goes with us through the things that he wants us to experience. When we place all of our trust in God, our tight spots are not nearly as tight as they would be without it. Fervent prayer at times of dire circumstances is a most effectual tool. Fervent prayer, I'm afraid, is almost a lost pillar of the church. A lot of our prayers are just repetitions. We said the same thing this morning, we said at noon, and we said at supper, and we said before we go to bed, and we'll say the same things tomorrow. A lot of our prayers are not specific. A lot of our prayer to God's ears must sound repetitious. Sometimes it's like, "God, here's my list." Now, number 7 and 32, they're kind of important. The rest of them, well, you know what we need for it. You know that. So I'm just not very specific. I'm just not fervent enough in there. James 5:16 says, "The effectual, fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much." Fervent means, fervent is an adjective that has the meaning of having or showing great warmth or intensity of spirit. Ardent. Here it says it's even hot, burning, or glowing. Effective prayer has more to do with the condition of the one who is praying. A prayer of a righteous man or woman is powerful and effective. It's another way that another version says James 5:16. 1 Peter 3:12 says, "For the eyes of the Lord are over the righteous, and his ears are open unto their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against them that do evil." Proverbs 15:8 says, "The prayer of the upright pleases him." So we need to go to him with a clear heart, with a clear conscience, with a clear mind. I was exposed to fervent prayer at a very early age. I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I was staying with my great aunt, Deck, and my great uncle Bob, Deck and Bob Hart, in their little wooden house in Mud Fork, West Virginia. And Deck and Uncle Bob were as poor as they could be in everything but their faith. I remember Aunt Deck cooking our supper on a wood stove. It was hot. This was the summertime. But she put those logs in that wood stove and she cooked the supper. That was really good. They put me to bed in a spare bedroom and blew out the oil lamps, making the house pitch dark. Way up a holler in West Virginia. I was lying there in my bed thinking about my house, where we had electricity. And Mom cooked on a gas stove. The silence was abruptly broken by Aunt Deck in full throat, calling out to the Lord. I suspect she was kneeling by her bedside and offering up her bedtime prayers. There were no neighbors nearby. The closest, wherever they were, could probably hear Aunt Deck praying anyway. I can't remember exactly what she was praying for or about, but I believe part of her prayer was thanking God for his provision. And she prayed for him to bless me and for the souls of her loved ones. When she said amen, the silence of being in the rural West Virginia took over again. Then Uncle Bob started. It was his turn. He apparently was kneeling by the bed saying his evening prayers, and he was just as fortunate, just as fervent. They must have thought heaven was a long way away because they prayed in a loud, loud voice. And I could not think that this was just for my benefit. I suspect that old house rang with those same prayers or their prayers every night, whether they were there alone or not. And most of the time, they were there alone. But they knew God.
Amen.
And they prayed fervently to him. Obviously, this experience made an impression on me because that would be my definition of fervent prayer for the rest of my life. I firmly believe God honors effectual, fervent prayer. And there's a biblical example I want to share with you tonight. It's in Acts 12, verses 3 to 19. King Herod, actually the grandson of Herod the Great, had just had the Apostle James beheaded. James was a brother of Apostle John and one of Jesus' closest confidants during his ministry here on earth. He was in the inner circle of Jesus' inner circle. Herod was beginning to take hostile actions against certain men of Christ's church. James was the first apostle to be martyred. Like the politician of today, who would use polling data to determine his next action, Herod noticed that the leaders of the Jews were very pleased that he had removed James in such a public spectacle. The Jews thought James' beheading surely would send a message to the new church. Herod sent his guards to arrest Peter and put him in prison. If killing James was liked by the Jews, taking Peter out would please them even more, he thought. Herod appointed 4 squadrons, that's 16 men, to guard Peter around the clock. Herod intended to hold Peter during the days of leavened bread, after Passover and after Jewish Easter, and after the whole festival was over, Herod would bring him for trial. Actually, that meant he would be charged, sentenced, and executed, with little or no evidence presented. 4 men at a time would guard Peter. Peter's wrist would be chained to the right wrist of the 2 guards. The other 2 guards would watch the doors to the cell and to the prison on that watch. The loss of Peter at this stage of the church would appear to be a real blow to the Church of Christ. In homes throughout Jerusalem, small groups gathered to pray fervently for Peter to be released, to be spared the sword, and be returned to them. So the night after the last day of the festival, Peter was chained to his guards and was sleeping between the 2 men. Let's hit the pause button right there for a second. Did you notice right there in Acts 12, verse 6, it said, Peter was sleeping. Peter was sleeping. Peter had to know his hours here on earth were very, very numbered. How could a man in this circumstance possibly sleep? Peter was in a tight spot. He's chained to guards. There are guards blocking the doors. There's 4 men watching one guy. But Peter, at this time, was resigned to a death for his Savior. We didn't find Peter denying Christ this time like he did at the crucifixion. Peter had grown spiritually, and as he had labored as an apostle left behind when Jesus ascended to heaven. Peter was convicted it would be a stingless death. When you think about it, it probably is. Cut your head off real fast, it probably isn't going to bother you that much. He was convinced it would be a stingless death. He was also convinced that his work was finished. And he was ending it with joy. He had dropped into a peaceful sleep hours before what was to be his execution. Meanwhile, back at Mary's house, as it says in verse 5, many were gathered to pray for Peter. The church had been praying without ceasing. Prayer without ceasing, and I guarantee it was fervent prayer. Now back to this incredible story. In verse 7, an angel of the Lord appeared in the dungeon and smote Peter on the side. Apparently, the angel of the Lord probably didn't reach down and smote him. Peter's probably laying on the floor. He probably kicked him in the side. Try to wake him up. Telling him to wake up and rise up, Peter's chains fell off. The angel told Peter to gird himself and bind his sandals and skedaddle. That's not a biblical term. That's a West Virginia term. Peter thought he was having another one of his visions, and he passed through the prison doors unseen by the posted Roman guards, but he was safely delivered to Mary's house, and the prayers for him were still going on. When Rhoda answered the door, as Peter was knocking, she first thought it was Peter's angel. Oh, ye of little faith, I guess. Meanwhile, the guards at the prison slept through the whole thing. And when they couldn't find Peter, Herod had them put to death. This is a perfect example that God gives us in the Bible about how a church's fervent prayer without ceasing is extremely effectual. Now, this thing about Peter being able to sleep peacefully in the hours that would have led up to the execution seems a little bit far-fetched. I gotta admit that. Everybody ought to admit that. But I assure you that it is not. Over the last 5 years, I've spent more than 20 hours on the surgeon's table under deep anesthesia. I've had 2 ablations of the heart where they go in and through arteries or veins and they cauterize areas of the heart in order to get the electrical impulses firing correctly and restore a regular sinus rhythm heartbeat. I had heartbeats of over 165 beats a minute, which is like double what they're supposed to be. These ablations and God's healing has returned to me normal rhythm. Each of those procedures required about 6 hours under anesthesia. And then flat on my back for another 8 hours without movement. I've had a heart biopsy where they go in and take a snippet of tissue to be analyzed. Last year I had 3 stents put in the arteries around my heart. A couple of weeks ago they went in and cut the Conrad artery on my left side of my throat and cleaned it out. 70 years of cheeseburgers and french fries have taken their toll. In all of those procedures, though, I found myself lying on a gurney, about to be put into a deep sleep so they could do whatever they were going to do. In this case, they were going to clamp off the upper part of my artery and the lower part of my artery. They're going to slice it open, they're going to clean it out, and then they're going to open those up, let it go again, and everything's supposed to be all right. I was in a tight spot, you could say. Wasn't much I could do about it. But I had already made my decision. I had already decided that God was in charge, not me. Not my will, but His. And giving all of that over, believe me, was a very, very peaceful feeling. I didn't have any trouble at all sleeping the night before any of those procedures. I had no worry. What was the worst that could happen? I wake up in heaven, in the arms of Jesus. What's the worst that could happen? That's it, and that's pretty doggone good. Either way, I won, as they would say. I'm going to win either way here. But I was peaceful. So I can understand how Peter could be sleeping.
Amen.
I can understand that. And it's all because we have a powerful, powerful God. And as we said last night, prayer is the most powerful force in the universe. I also have a modern-day example of fervent prayer, duly noted not in the Bible, but in the historical news accounts. I clearly recall a time somewhat recently when a lot of people all across America, and even some people around the world, were praying fervently for an outcome that seemed almost impossible. But our prayers were answered. Remember the name Jessica Lynch. Jessica was a member of the 507th Maintenance Company of the U.S. Army, and she was deployed in Iraq. When the soldiers she was with got lost from the convoy and ended up in an ambush, she disappeared from the scene of the Humvee wreck. The news of her situation struck me very hard because Jessica Lynch grew up in Worth County, West Virginia, a little rural county that bordered the county where I grew up. She lived, and her family lived about 20 minutes, probably from where I lived. The pictures of her on that TV at that time showed a beautiful young American girl that would be in real harm's way, having fallen into the hands of those terrorists in the Middle East. I urged the church I was attending at the time to pray for her safe return. People across the nation were holding prayer sessions on her behalf. It turns out she was being held in Saddam Hospital under the armed guards of Iraqi soldiers. She had broken bones. One leg was shattered in the Humvee wreck, and ankle and arm were also broken. At one point, she recounted later that they were going to amputate her leg in this very primitive hospital. But she asked God to stop her from the surgery. And miraculously, He did. Jessica Lynch was at a tight spot. America was praying. I was fervently praying. Every thought that I had of her throughout the day, I would stop and pray. An Iraqi citizen, Mohammed Oda, became the angel God sent to rescue Jessica. He was visiting the hospital and found it to be under very heavy armed guard, heavy security. He surmised they were holding Americans there. He said he got a glimpse of an American woman surrounded by Iraqis. He was said to have walked 6 miles to a U.S. checkpoint to inform the American forces of Jessica's location. U.S. soldiers sent Muhammad back to the hospital for more information. He returned with maps of the hospital to help with the rescue. Meanwhile, I was still encouraging my church to pray, and prayers were being lifted up all across America to return Jessica safely. After 9 days as a POW, Marines and Navy SEALs staged a diversionary attack, and others went in to bring Jessica out safely. She was the first POW to be rescued since World War II. She was the first female to ever be rescued from a POW situation. That resulted in pictures and videos shown around the world to answer all of our prayers. Jessica joined the Army to help with her college desires. She wanted to be a teacher, an early childhood teacher. She now teaches in that rural, tiny county in West Virginia. She has been unapologetic about her faith. She told the Christian Broadcasting Network, "I felt God was the only person that I could turn to. He was the one person who understood how much I needed him. And he understands how much we need him every time." This is a great example of God answering constant prayer, fervent prayer, specific prayer. While we are praying, God is working. As I said last night, we are in a war. A war for the soul of our families, our neighbors, our community, our nation, and ultimately our own soul. Satan is the author of evil. God is the author of good. We must fervently pray for the salvation of our family members, our friends, and the other people that we know who are not saved. You know, we all want to spend a lot of time saying, "Would you pray for me? I've just had all this surgery, I've had all this stuff done. Would you pray for me? I'm having problems with my gout. Would you pray with me? I'm having problems. Pray for me, I'm having problems." Whatever your health problems are, we're spending so much time with that. And we're spending so little time praying for other people who are bound for hell. If we don't do something to turn the things around in this country. Our needs are all important, but they can't be the only thing that we're praying. Can't be the only thing. If you were here last night, I asked you to bring specific names to the altar and lift them up to God. God is the one who must do the work of salvation. He's the one who will soften the heart, humble the soul of the one who's lost. Our prayers are prayers of support for God's will. And his will is that not one soul would be lost.
Amen. Yes. Yes.
If you're here tonight and you don't have the peace of knowing, if you were to die tonight, that you would have a home in heaven or an eternity of real peace, come, let us get that settled. If you want peace, this is the place to find it, at this altar behind me. I was 8 years old and went to a revival meeting at the Rush Creek Baptist Church by myself. No parents, no relatives at the meeting. I heard heaven and hell preached that night, and I knew I wanted heaven. Hell sounded like a really bad place, and it is. I went to the altar and asked Jesus into my heart, and I will still remember today that feeling of the weight of the world being lifted off of my shoulders. walk a mile to the church, walk a mile home at night in the dark. And the weight of the world was lifted off my shoulders. Because I had been promised a home in heaven. That peace is available to you, but it's also available to the people that we know. So I still urge you tonight, think about family members first. Think about neighbors. Think about people you might work with or you might socialize with who do not know you as their Lord and Savior, do not know our Jesus as Lord and Savior. Specific, fervent prayer for those names is what we need. Specific, fervent prayer. And we may have to get bold enough at some point in time to tell them we're praying for them. You know, people say, I just can't do that. I can't talk to people about God. I can't talk to people about Jesus. Get over it. What's the worst that can happen? I tell you, they don't want to hear it. They don't care. But you have touched their heart. And Jesus, God our Father, can soften that heart. Yes. And if they hear it, they have a chance. Even when my friends passed that I know have probably never accepted Jesus, still have that hope that sometime they heard. Sometimes they heard the word. And that sometimes things, when they got in a tight spot, they might have called out to Jesus. But if they've never heard, they don't have a chance. And we are letting them perish. So tonight, if you have someone on your heart, I urge you to come forward and pray at this altar and lift up those names to God. Pray fervently, pray specifically, pray for His work to be done in their lives.